lived and worked across 4 different continents. I've lived and worked in India. I spent a lot of time in Southern Africa, then stint in the UK, and then, of course, now Dubai. And this 30 years of my sort of life of working and meeting people has really, allowed me to probably gain some fairly interesting insights around people. Because the job itself has been such that it has involved discussing with government, with politicians, with corporate leaders, with NGOs, with community leaders on different aspects of how investment can happen, how development can happen, how investors feel comfortable coming into new markets, how different people from different parts of the world can work together. So today, if I may, obviously I am not an academic. I don't live by providing any particular theoretical lessons to people. What I do is I am a businessman. I invest in businesses. I manage businesses. And during this sort of work of mine, I have obviously managed to meet so many people, seen so many different cultures at work, and therefore have some real life experiences of working with different people. And it's really around that I would like to talk to you, because it's really about sharing what I know. And then, of course, we can get into question and answers. So thank you very much again, therefore, for the opportunity. And please look at me as not an individual who has all the answers, but look at me as an individual who has worked across many parts of the world and therefore has hopefully got some real life experiences to share with you.
So today, I'm sorry, by the way, could you please turn on your camera, if it's possible?
My camera is on.
Actually, it's off for us. We can't see, but it's okay.
That's interesting.
Okay, let's continue.
Okay, I'm sorry about that. My camera is definitely on from my side.
Oh, okay, it's okay. Maybe you can just use iPad. That's why we can't see you. It's okay.
Did you manage to see me before I put on the presentation?
No.
Oh, I was not seen at all.
Okay. It's okay now. Please continue.
Okay, that's a pity. All right, so sorry about all this. Is the presentation on? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So essentially today we're going to try and talk through what I call leadership across cultures, and where I want you to focus your mind on is something very fundamental, because it's not rocket science that leaders generally in any space of life, they live, they work, they have to make decisions in a very fast, very evolving, very dynamic world. I mean, that's the nature of leadership. So that's nothing unique. But what we are seeing, given the world that we live in, and increasingly the world that we live in, is that there is this additional challenge building up around having to manage businesses, people across different boundaries, different geographies. And most interestingly, not only managing such variety of people, but in that process having to solve not isolated problems, but common problems. So a lot of today's problems are actually common across the world. So it is impossible for leaders to isolate problems into different geographies and deal with them in isolation. So that is why leadership has become almost a game, if I may use the word, around how do you manage different traditions, different cultures, because ultimately, in total, that affects the overall quality of your leadership. Because every generation says this, and it needs to be said, that we do live in a world full of complex problems. And these problems, as each one of us will hopefully agree, cross boundaries, as I said. But interestingly, and I've seen it in many, many leaders themselves are unable to take that jump or take that leap and embrace diversity, embrace differences, and make things work in a more structured way. Now, that is what therefore brings us to the concept that I like to talk about, and I talk about it a lot across various universities and schools, is the concept of what I call cultural intelligence. Now, we have all heard of the word emotional intelligence. We also know things like the ability to have high IQs. But what the world is not probably talking about is not just knowledge, but how do leaders adapt and bring into their mindset the issue of cultures so that it gives them an ability to lead or manage businesses across geographies. And, you know, the interesting thing, like most things in life, is some people are born leaders who understand cultural issues very naturally. And some actually don't, which is why it is incumbent for leaders as they develop themselves to accept that cultural intelligence is a tool. It's not something to be dismissed or ignored, because that can come back to bite you. So before we therefore go into this issue of cultural intelligence and how therefore one learns the tricks of being culturally an intelligent leader, let's probably spend 5 or 10 minutes on understanding what is driving what we call the cultural challenge. What is driving it? Because there are certain forces at play which is driving it. It's not happening in vacuum. It's not happening in isolation. So one of the first things I say, first driver of cultural challenge is what you see in front of you, the sheer interconnectivity, interdependence. And I don't need to go further than to just give you an example of what is happening in the chip industry. Today, you see that major IT companies, major technology companies, major hardware companies are not being able to meet their supply commitments because there is a dearth or there is a supply disruption around the chips. Now, clearly, it brings to bear very, 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 very obviously that how businesses in one part of the world is affected by what's happening in another part of the world. So that's what I mean by the sheer interconnectivity and interdependence that every product and every service has in the world today. The second driver of cultural challenges, as I call it, is the flow of information. Now, I don't know how you guys feel, but I feel almost very fearful, very scared when I go into board meetings or when I go into presentations, because there is always somebody who will have more information than me. There will always be somebody who will share certain information, right or wrong, true or false, which will have its own bias and therefore its own influence. And this is a dangerous thing that we are finding ourselves in, that there is so much information, true, some not true, some just so much that leaders have no ability to decide which information to go by. And that is what is creating a serious complexity, because information is coming from everywhere, from every part of the world, instantaneously into each other's tablets, into each other's emails, into each other's computers. So you don't know at what point in time which person is being influenced by which piece of information. And that is something that has never been the case even 20 years back. As a matter of fact, when I was growing up, and if I said anything wrong, the first thing my parents would check is what books am I reading and what newspapers am I looking at? Because they could immediately identify the source of information that is making me behave in a certain way. But today, leaders don't have that ability because information, as I said, is coming thick and fast from everywhere. The other driver, this cultural challenge, globalization of supply chains. Now, COVID actually showed this in a very, very intense way. Till COVID happened, we were celebrating, weren't we? We were celebrating the idea of globalization. We were celebrating the idea of creating production hubs in places where you can produce things the cheapest. But COVID suddenly told us that this enormous diversification of supply chains is dangerous because it has led during COVID and continues to be the case of supply chain bottlenecks, where today just bringing goods from one place to another is costing 5 times what it costed before COVID. And this is not a challenge that leaders faced on a routine basis even a couple of decades back. The fourth driver of cultural challenge is one of my favorites. And I try to explain it by showing you the pictures of those very lovely ladies. And then, of course, on the right-hand corner, showing you the KFC. Now, what I mean by this is that one of the biggest things that I've seen happening in the world today, across the world, is that gone are the days when somebody would accept what you give them. So when I was growing up, for example, I was told hamburgers are good and McDonald's is good. I would accept it. I was told wearing jeans that makes you look like Elvis Presley was good for you. And I would accept that. But that is not the case today. Today, everywhere in the world you go, people in the local sense want something that meets their own personal traditions and cultures. So what you see in front of you through those 3 ladies that is there is that these 3 ladies are actually models for Hermes. Hermes, as you know, is one of these very famous French designer stores and chains. And they have always been known for their scarves, their ties, and their very dainty Western clothes. When they went to India, they went with that business model. And then they realized that Indians are not interested in their product, but they're interested in their brand. So Hermes, this French European brand, decided to create a new product, which is what these models are wearing, which are a westernized version of the Indian sari. Because they realized that Indian women were more comfortable with robes like this than the clothes that they were trying to sell. The same example goes with KFC. Now, I don't know how many of you know, but KFC actually stands for Kentucky Fried Chicken. So it was essentially created as a chain to sell fried chicken. And they went to India to sell Kentucky Fried Chicken. Very soon they realized, and it's a failing on their part, that they didn't realize it before they went in, that Indians, in fact, Indians are actually vegetarians. So very quickly, Kentucky Fried Chicken, KFC, started making vegetarian burgers. And their biggest selling product today in India is vegetarian burgers. So this is what I'm trying to explain, that suddenly leaders are no longer able to say, I have a product in this part of the world and I'm going to go and sell it to that part of the world because there's a market there. They will have to instead understand the nuances of that part of the world and be able to be flexible with what they have to offer. The other driver of cultural challenge is people like yourselves. Because today there is a phenomenon, third country kids. Now, third country kids are nothing but youngsters who have, on an average, by the time they turn 21, lived in more than 3 countries. And increasingly, there are a lot of kids like that, either because their fathers had transferable jobs, which is itself a phenomenon of globalization, or because they went to school to a different part of the world and then started working somewhere else. So these youngsters, these kids, the third country kid phenomenon that I am referring to, are extremely choosy. They are a breed unto themselves. So you may see somebody who is got an Indian name or a Turkish name or an Irish name, but you will not be therefore able to generalize and say, this is how this guy thinks, because he's probably lived in 3, 4, 5 different cities before he turned 25, and he therefore has very, very diverse set of preferences and tastes. This is something that leaders will have to understand. The last part of what I call the drivers of cultural challenge is change itself. Now, because of technology, because of globalization, because of social media, because of information flow, all of this unfortunately means that there is nothing called a constant. And today's leaders become what you call irrelevant very quickly if they don't see change coming and be able to adapt change. So what I've tried to do, therefore, so far, is to try and explain to you some very basic facts, which I hope that you can relate to, because these are obvious facts. These are facts that you're seeing around you, which is that if you are going to be running successful corporations, if you are going to lead yourself as a leader in the family or in the community, you've got to understand and accept that you cannot remain in your own cave and you cannot remain insular. You have to accept the wider world having a much bigger impact on you than you would care to probably accept or know. Now, like most things in life, and there is a saying, I don't know whether you guys have heard this saying. There is a very classic saying which says that more things change, more they remain the same. And that is particularly true about this topic of cultural intelligence. Because frankly, to me, as much as I love talking about it, it's not a new concept. I don't think anything that I've said to you guys so far is brand new or something that would make you feel, oh, geez, Sanjeev has said something I never thought of. Maybe you haven't thought of it in a coherent way or in a structured way or in a focused way, but you've certainly thought about it. Because cultural intelligence is nothing but about being intuitive, about feeling the pulse around you, about understanding what is affecting people's behavior and therefore their decisions around you. So it's not new. It's what human beings do as human beings. They do that through their reading, through their travel, through their conferencing, through their networking, etc., etc., etc. So therefore, why is it necessary for us to discuss it? I'll tell you why it's necessary to discuss it. It's necessary to discuss it because as much as you know these things exist, more often than not, a lot of us tend to live life by the core of what our existence always was, rather than allowing our core to widen and embrace. One of the best ways to put it is what I've said in that bottom point of that slide, that somehow, somewhere in your leadership in the future, just tell yourself, just remind yourself that being different should not make you feel indifferent towards people. When you see people who talk different, dress different, think different, there was a time when we would disregard them because each of them are potent forces around which your business will be based. So what therefore is the prerequisite for a culturally intelligent person? And I've tried to put that in this form. said that it starts with an interest in people, because you're really talking about people. It also has to have a large amount of determination in yourself about wanting to be relevant in this world, as opposed to being just a very difficult person. And then the third thing is a stamina, because it is not easy to accept change, adapt yourself, and decide based on the diversity that you see around you. It's not easy. It's very easy to get tired, very easy to ignore it, and very easy to justify that it doesn't matter. And most importantly, the earlier point that I made is that when you see people who are different, please teach yourself, train yourself to stand up when you see prejudice, when you see bad behavior, just because people are different, because that cannot be the basis for any bad behavior. So when one looks at the data on leaders who have proven very, very strongly to have been extremely good, culturally intelligent leaders, one of the first things that you notice is that they have a core which is built around their principles, built around their beliefs, built around their own education, but then they have the flex. And the flex is about widening your paradigms. It's about creating the adaptability in your mind. It's about the ability to reach out and embrace differences as being a reality. And flex, as I call it, the flex does not happen if you don't have a strong core. So core is important. So do not dismiss what you are. But there are people who walk into a room, immediately relate to some people. They land in another country, they can connect. But not everybody is like this. A lot of people, in fact, most of us, whenever we see something new, and I want you to feel the statement, whenever we see something new, we tend to go back to our core. We tend to hide in our core. We get comfort in our core. And that is where I am saying to leaders, don't do that. Try to train yourself to say that through this core, I will embrace which I have not seen before. That, therefore, is what I say is the most difficult part of leading in a culturally complex world. That is, how do you understand yourself? Because if you don't understand yourself, if you are not sure about your own values, your own principles, your own knowledge, you can never be flexible. Because to be flexible, to be adaptable, to be embracing, you need a core which is strong. Which is why, as they say, most things in life, but it's certainly in this particular case, charity begins at home. So for you to be a culturally responsible leader, you have to somehow learn what is it that makes you? What is it that defines you? What is it that you are not going to compromise? Because there is a danger. There's a danger here if you allow yourself to be very adaptable, very flexible, very embracing, without knowing your core. That you may end up making wrong decisions, or you may make decisions that will ultimately not sit well with your own belief system and your own principles. So know yourself. That's where it starts. So in a nutshell, the topic of cultural intelligence and what it poses as a challenge for new leaders is essentially about the 4 or 5 points that are made here. First, please remember that more and more and more and more people around the world are making decisions not based on where they are born, which religion they're part of, or which city they lived in, or which university they went to. They are making decisions increasingly based on their values, which may differ. So within the same family, in the past, it was possible to predict that if a family lives in a certain part of the city and comes from a certain religion and have gone to the certain church, they will behave in a certain way. But within the families, we are seeing evidence that sons, daughters, fathers, mothers, differently because their values are different. So that is the first issue that becomes a challenge. Because what I said is people are refusing to be conditioned, which is the second point I'm making, that you do not assume that just because people have grown up in a certain way or live in a certain way, they are conditioned to think the same way. It's not a given. And then you are largely talking about markets and a population going forward, where decision makers today, most consumers today, most of your customers of tomorrow expect you to be better, to be bigger, to be more. When we buy a mobile phone, I am pretty sure you are already looking at what the next model will be. If Apple doesn't deliver, you actually get disappointed in Apple. You forget that the phone that you still have works and works well. You somehow get disappointed that Apple has not given you a new phone with new features as their next edition. So again, you're dealing with a customer base who is just simply used to change, used to innovation, and expects you, therefore, to always provide you with new ways of doing things, which is the other challenge for leadership. Because there was a time when I was growing up, when the radio or the television that I had at home, nothing changed for 10 years. Same type of TV that everybody bought, the same type of radio, it had the same problems, and nobody gave a damn. Those days are gone. So therefore, think of yourself not as a leader, but as a change agent. That how do you allow change to happen under your watch? How do you encourage people who work for you, work with you, to be innovative, to challenge the old paradigms and propose ideas that you are then able to make decisions on? Because if you don't, then you will become irrelevant. So if I may therefore try and wrap up, try and sort of summarize some of the stuff that I've said, at the end of the day, increasingly, I must tell you, the good news is that universities globally are adding into their curriculum, currently on a voluntary basis, but I suspect it will become mandatory soon. They are adding curriculums around this whole subject of cultural intelligence. They are encouraging students to take it up as a subject to study. But in the meanwhile, as practitioners, as leaders, as professionals, just tell yourselves that you will work on your sense of awareness. You will work on your sense of curiosity. You will work on your confidence to ask questions when you don't understand something. Do not assume status quo. There is nothing called status quo. And please tell yourself that you will be open to change. You will be adaptable. And most importantly, I know we've learned it from school. Our teachers used to say that learn to listen. Don't pass judgments, learn to listen. Because you see, there is a real danger. There is a danger. If you don't take what I've said so far seriously, because the danger is you will be a poorer leader. You will be probably a failed leader, because your business will suffer from productivity challenges. It will suffer from lower quality of service. It will probably become more costly to manage it because you're not listening, you're not adapting, you're not evolving, you're not innovating. And ultimately, you will have challenges in terms of worker discontent, low morale, which has its own ramifications. So the challenge is invisible because none of these things that I mentioned to you, low productivity, low quality of service, greater cost, lower staff morale, hits you immediately. It takes a few years or a couple of decades to happen. But by the time it happens, and if you haven't seen it happen, and if you haven't done something about it, chances are that you will probably have a very chronic problem, which will be difficult to redeem and correct. So I will end by saying that I have a couple of advices for you. One is, don't get fixated on forms or appearances or protocols. Try and see what's behind. And one of the examples that I like to give is what I say there, SIM cards and Coke. And this is just a very simple example of how consumer demand is tempered around reality. So in Africa, for example, one of the discoveries that Coca-Cola made when they were developing their sales strategy, and they're a very successful company in Africa, is they realized, and listen to this carefully, they realized that their biggest competition is not Pepsi. The biggest competition is SIM cards. Now, you will probably say, what the hell am I saying? Well, I'm saying what I'm saying. What they realized is that in Africa, where you have a lot of people in the informal sector, people who earn daily wages or weekly wages or monthly wages, they tend to drink Coke at certain times of the week or the month when they're cash flush. But towards the latter part of the month or the week, when their money is running out, they don't tend to buy Coke. Instead, they make sure that the SIM card has got enough data for them to be able to communicate. So suddenly, your competition is a very different form of competition. The second point I'll make is the point I made already, that think of yourself as a change agent. Think of yourself as somebody who is there to question and to probe and then to act. And the word I use there is confidence and arrogance. And it's two beautiful words that I like to talk about. Because to me, confidence is when you can tell yourself that I can do something, right? That's what is confidence. Now, arrogance is when you think or when you tell yourself that only I can do it, nobody else can do it. So there is a very fine line between confidence and arrogance. And that is, again, part of the cultural maturity that you have to have. Because as a leader, when you're exposed to different parts of the world, to different cultures, do not think that only you know what is right. Tell yourself there are many ways to get to the same solution. The third is what I call that, please, all of this that I've said to you doesn't mean you suddenly become a very defensive person or a very anxious person or a person who starts doubting himself or herself. That's not the point. But because, there is something in the Bible which says the meek will not inherit the world, the meek will inherit the world, whichever way it goes. But I do say that they will not. And the example I draw there is a funny one, but I like saying it, that in the jungle, there's no point in you saying, I'm a vegetarian and I only eat vegetables and I'm not interested in meat, because that doesn't mean that the lion will not come and eat you. So in other words, what I'm trying to say through this is that it is not good enough for you to say, I am okay, because the environment around you will not allow you to be okay unless you can evolve, adapt, improve, develop. And the last thing is, be scared to ask. And this is a mistake that I've seen so many businesses do when they go to another part of the world. They automatically assume that they know that part of the world better than the locals. They go in, they don't take partners, they don't listen to local advice, and then they regret it. So bring people in, have a collaborative way of leading as opposed to a military way of leading. So fundamentally, the bottom line to everything that I'm saying is what I kind of, define as multiculturalism as a tool. There is a Japanese word for it, which is monozukuri, which actually means making things happen together. And keep this as a slide and keep this something as a memory for you to try and, leverage from, because it's all about creating a spirit that creates collaboration. It's all about creating an environment where different approaches are encouraged. It's all about creating a leadership style which highlights and inspires a collective purpose as opposed to selfish ways of looking at business models. And fourthly, and most importantly, it is about creating optimization of capital, optimization of cost, optimization of skills. Because at the end of the day, if you can bring different people with different ideas and make them work together, it just stands to reason that the ultimate offering or the ultimate proposition or the ultimate product will be stronger. So develop that attitude of assimilation, collaboration, and alliances as opposed to going alone.